Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Boss Body Podcast. This is Sarah Haas. I am so glad that you're here with me today. I have an amazing guest, Bria Gadd, and Bria specializes in female hormones. That is something that is top of mind for so many women in midlife, either perimenopause, postmenopause, and beyond. We're all dealing with that crazy shitstorm of hormones going on. And she works with helping women who are in that stage of life to release weight, to gain energy, and to find clarity in the midst of hormonal chaos, which I love that term, hormonal chaos. Bria is a functional diagnostic nutrition practitioner. She's also a personal trainer and a hormone specialist. And she's the host of the wildly popular The Period Whisperer podcast, which is one of the top 2% wellness podcasts in the world. So it's amazing to have her on today. She's also been featured in Fox News, Women's Health, and in lots of other top podcasts like the Midlife Makeover show. So, Bria, we are so lucky to have you on the show today and help share your wisdom and help bring us some understanding about healing our hormones so that we can feel good and live this second half of our lives being vibrant and amazing. So,
Hi.
welcome.
Thank you. My gosh, Sarah, I'm so excited to be here. I'm super honored. Thank you for having me. And yes, my goal today is to share some things that I hope help clarify things for whoever's listening and just better understand their body as a woman so that they can thrive in this second spring, we'll call it.
Yes, and I love that, better understanding our bodies, because
Mhm.
that's key. There's so much going on, and there isn't enough information out there, especially about hormones.
Yeah.
Women's health in particular
Yeah.
is not something that there is enough studies, enough information, enough financing to learn all the things we need to know. So that's why I love having people like you on the podcast who have done a deep dive into these subjects and who can really help educate us because we can't solve our physical, emotional and mental issues if we don't know what the heck is going on inside.
Totally, I totally agree. And then it can be super confusing because you're doing all the things and the things aren't working. And I think for women, we're quite introspective and we can start to be like, oh, well, something's wrong with me and not your body, like you, your soul, yourself. And I think that's so damaging when, one of the most fascinating statistics I learned when I started getting into hormones was that women weren't required to be a part of medical or wellness research studies until the mid 1990s. You probably already talked about this. And that means that if you're in my age box and beyond, I'm 40, almost 43, then we have been taught things that don't necessarily apply or haven't been studied on our body. And I mean, we create life, like we're different other than we're not small men. So, and I think on that note, it is beautiful to see the rise in women's health, like being talked about so much more. Like we are hearing, which is incredible, but it is important to try to cut through that and get like some real, real clarity. And my goal is really to try to create some metaphors because that's how I learned to make it as simple as possible so we can get those answers for ourselves.
Oh, fantastic. Yes, I absolutely love it. So before we really dive in, I want to hear a little bit about you, about your background, about how you got into this fascinating world of hormones. What brought you to this place?
Yeah, it's always a $1 million question, isn't it? Because we often have a story that kind of propels us into this area. So I had started my career and built an online business for about 12 years in the health and wellness. So as a trainer and nutrition coach, while I have two children who are now, gosh, almost 13 and 16, which is bananas. And it was really great. And, Sarah, I like was reaching my mid 30s thinking like, okay, I might not have everything figured out, but at least I have like my health figured out. And I think that's always a funny time. You say those things out loud and the universe kind of comes and is like, do you? Because around 35, I first started to notice a shift in my clients. A lot of my personal training and nutrition clients, saying things like, I'm just not feeling like I used to. And like they weren't getting the same fitness results. They were starting to have some real energy or sleep issues. And it kind of, as a practitioner, it really makes you step back. You're like, what is not working here? But then around 37, it started happening to me. And it began like, just this kind of overall general fatigue creeping up. I started feeling like I always needed to take a nap or have some crazy cravings in the afternoon. I gained what I like to call undeserved weight, which is like when you're doing the same thing, and you haven't changed anything, but then your body changes. And my period started to have some changes in it, which is always a key indicator. And then finally, the kicker for me was I stopped sleeping well. I started waking up in the middle of the night. For me, it was always between 2 and 4 a.m. in a sweat. And you do some Googling when you're up that many nights with those hours. And it's not a good thing to Google because there's nothing good comes out of night sweats, when you're Googling those symptoms. So it had me go to my healthcare practitioner, which is always a good thing. I mean, like, let's rule out anything major. And she was incredible, did all the blood work, asked all the questions. And in the end, she kind of looked at me and was like, Bria, you're the picture of health. And although I was grateful that I didn't have any of the things that had come up when I was Googling, it was a dark moment because if you're like, I don't feel well, like something's not right. And I specifically remember thinking, if I'm the picture of health and this is the best I'm going to feel at 37, like, I don't know that I want the next 40 years. Like, what is that even going to look like? I'm working hard. And it was kind of that moment where I was like, okay, I must be missing something. I'm not ready to wave this white aging flag and call it that and move on. And that's what really propelled me into understanding women's hormones, understanding my cycle, what was going on, what's happening after the age of 35 for us, how that impacts our health. And through the process, and we can talk about more specifically what I learned, but I was able to find my energy again, find my sleep again, most nights. Like, sleep is not a perfect thing, but most nights I always say, and feel better like than I did even in my 20s. So it was learning that piece was massive. And I just remember thinking, if I'm in the wellness industry as a woman, and I only work with women, and I didn't know these things, how on earth is a woman who, has a beautiful career that's not in the wellness industry going to know these things? And that's what really made the fundamental shift for me to make this like a real passion and focus in my life to help share the knowledge in the easiest way possible.
Yeah, and like you said, our bodies constantly change.
Yeah.
So we cannot just continue doing things the exact same way. I mean, I know when
Yeah.
I was in my teen years, I could get away with a heck of a lot more than what I could get away with post having kids. And now I'm post menopause.
Yeah.
So, you have to keep changing how you take care of yourself. And that's one of the things that we're not taught. And I had a
Mhm.
similar experience like you, being healthy, eating well, exercising all the time, but feeling tired, having a lot of anxiety, just never feeling my best, and
Mhm.
and asking so many doctors, what's going on? Why do I feel this way? And they would say, well, you're a mom. Moms are always tired. That's just the way it is. And I would get these answers like you said, the blood work all looks good, you're the picture of health. And I was needing to take a nap in the afternoons, even
Yeah.
though I'd had 8 hours of sleep the night before. And it's so frustrating because women's bodies are complex.
Yeah.
They change.
Yeah.
There's different phases, the hormones change, and that's why there aren't as many studies because we're complicated. Let's
Yeah.
face it, we're complicated, and it's much harder to do that control group and, measuring this and that. And that's one of the big reasons that there aren't as many studies.
Totally.
on women's health. But I love that you decided, okay, if this is the best it's going to get, come on, there has to
Yeah.
be more to it. And I actually later found out that I was extremely estrogen dominant. And a year after I finally figured that out, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, hormone positive breast cancer. So
Oh,
hormones to me now are just a vital subject that I want to learn about and that I want my community to learn about.
yeah, I love that you say that. And you're right, complex, like I've shifted to using the word dynamic because I think, there is patterns in the dynamic cyclical nature of women. No one's just taught them to us or no one's prioritized them. So as we start to learn our own dynamic patterns and learn how to tune into what our body is saying to us, it can be easier than we think. It can be simpler, we'll call it, than we think. And I think that's ultimately what it comes down to is when we learn how to listen to the messages of our body instead of what the external world is always telling us, we can get to our answers so much faster. We just got to speak that language.
Yeah, and there is that inner knowing. You and I
Yeah.
both felt it. Something's not right. There has to
Yes.
be an answer. I don't understand why these doctors can't tell me. And I came to have a different way of thinking when I went to any kind of doctor or practitioner, and they said, there's nothing we can do about it. There's nothing that you can do about it. This is the way it is. To me, that translates to there's nothing that I can do about it,
Yeah.
meaning that particular practitioner. That doesn't mean there's nothing out there. It means they don't know it and they don't know what to do with what you're experiencing. And to
Yeah.
that really opened things up for me because every time I've had any kind of health issue, I keep seeking answers. I am not going to accept that this is just the way it is because there are people out there who can help with anything that we have going on.
Yeah. I agree. I love that. That's beautiful. I'm going to remember that. Thank you.
So, can you give us, a lot of us don't really understand this shitstorm of
Yeah.
hormones, right? We know we go through puberty and we start having periods, and then we're in our fertile years. And then we know the hormones are changing once we hit that perimenopause, late 30s, whenever it is, early 40s. But will you explain what is that? What is
Yeah.
the change? And how does it
Absolutely.
cause all these symptoms?
Yes, I love this. It's such a good question. And it's so helpful to understand this, I think, as a woman. So, perimenopause, obviously, we know menopause is the term that is used for when we no longer have enough hormones to be fertile or reproductively capable. And it's defined and diagnosed by 365 days after you've had a previous period, unless you've had, a surgical, they call it surgical menopause, where you've had to have a hysterectomy or so. And that's really like one day and then you're postmenopause and we're in this other window. And it is diagnosable that way. We're like, okay, you're here. Perimenopause isn't a diagnosable condition. This is why we can go and our hormones can look fine, quote unquote, and they're like, oh, you're just not there yet. But it's not diagnosable. It's not a condition, it's a transition. So it is essentially a reverse puberty. And it starts for pretty much all women around the age of 35, which is a lot younger than I think, I didn't realize. And I think it can be easily understood by recognizing there's three main things happening. First, the job of your hormones. So, whose role is it in the body managing these guys? And I talk about our hormones, our main sex hormones we're talking about. So, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone is being passed from our ovaries to our adrenals. And I think what's so important to understand about that, Sarah, is that one, all transitions require more energy, right? Whether you're moving, whether you're starting a new job, whether you're in a new relationship, you're ending a relationship, all transitions require more energy. So we know the body is starting this transition. And of course, the state of our adrenals at that time, so now we have more work happening in the body, the state of our adrenals is really going to determine how our body handles this transition a lot. So for many of us, and it's no hidden truth these days that women are still carrying so much more of like the emotional labor and the family labor as well as working, and just handling more in general. So often by the time we reach this point, our adrenals are pretty full. And add to that, we've all just navigated COVID. We've navigated probably some other loss or some things that have happened in the last few years. So the adrenals are now taxed and we're asking them to take something else on. And it's kind of like if you've ever worked in a corporate job and like one of your peers goes on, mat leave or a leave, and you're expected to do their job and your job, and there's no more time and no more money. Like things slip through the cracks. And that's where I think the initial challenge starts to happen, especially for women like 35 to 45, we would say it, is that things start to slip through the cracks. But this can go on well into, menopause and beyond. So we have this piece of the puzzle happening that's adding this workload. And of course, we only have so much energy to begin with. So when we're constantly drawing down, if we're juggling three balls already, you add this other ball in, again, things are going to get dropped. So that's number one that I think we need to understand. So it's not necessarily your hormones, it's who's handling the hormones and how busy they are at that time. The second big thing that's happening is, of course, the amount of these hormones are changing, right? So specifically our estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, but estrogen and progesterone are symbiotic in nature, meaning if there's not enough of one, there's too much of the other. That's where we get into estrogen dominance. And sometimes we see progesterone dominance. And the funny thing is that no matter which one's dominant, you're experiencing a lot of the same things. So it kind of either way, it's an uncomfortable thing. We want to stay in balance. If the amount of those hormones stays in balance or the balance is there as the amount decreases, we can navigate things fairly well. But what people don't always understand, and what I didn't understand, is that there's three parts to our hormones. There's the production of the hormones. So, okay, maybe we're making this transition okay, and the hormones are producing okay, but there's the metabolization of our hormones. So if your liver's been really busy dealing with all the stress over the last few years, dealing with maybe some chemicals and toxins in our environment, which we're all experiencing, we're going to experience backup, which means we're not metabolizing these hormones, causing more hormonal issues, which looks like all these symptoms we're experiencing. So there's that piece. And then of course there is our cells' ability to take in these hormones once they've been metabolized. So if if we're dealing with some oxidative stress damage in our cells from, whether it's like, again, a lot of toxins in our environment, toxins in our food, just overall stress of life, it's going to be hard for us to experience this. And this can speak to why, and I do believe that there's so much, I don't think women should suffer. And I think there's a lot of value in bioidentical hormones and hormone therapy. But this explains why we can take hormone therapy and it might move the needle a little, but it just doesn't move it all the way. It's because we're not metabolizing them. And it only kind of addresses one part of the issue. And finally, the third thing that's happening in our body is the impact of these hormonal shifts on our brain. And this is one I don't think is talked about enough, because specifically our hippocampus and our amygdala, which are our memory encoders and retrievers in the brain, are really sensitive to the shifts of estrogen and progesterone. So if we're dealing with, backed up adrenals, now we're going to have kind of some crazy hormones all over the place. It is a transition, so we are going to have some ebb and flow. It's not going to be a flawless experience. If our liver is backed up and the amount of these hormones are kind of coming all over the place, we really see that impact the brain, and the brain becomes more aware of things that are bothering us and things that used to bother us that we didn't deal with, things that, all of a sudden we're more bothered in general by them, and we're just more aware of them. And I think that can feel really frustrating for women, especially if if they are feeling more angry, less patient. But I like to offer a little different perspective on it. And so I always say, like, perimenopause and menopause happens for us and not to us. It happens for us to pay attention to the things, because from puberty until now, we've kind of been slightly hormonally hijacked every single month, right? Every single month, estrogen comes on, puts on these beautiful rose-colored glasses to make us amenable to procreate, and also to make us prioritize other people over ourselves for their survival. We have to keep our kids alive, right? And now that's going away. which is actually a really powerful thing because now we get to access how we really feel and we get to start setting boundaries and things around that. But we have to see it, I think, as that opportunity. It's like we finally get to think a bit more like experience like a man's life. We're not hormonally hijacked anymore, and we can make these changes now. So how you're feeling is how you're feeling. And that's an
That
important
is fantastic because I do think we feel like perimenopause and menopause happens to us.
one.
And I like to see the silver lining in
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
It's the cycle of life. It's obviously what our bodies are meant to go through. And I think
Totally.
what you said about, okay, we have less estrogen, so we can't really tolerate everything as much as we used to. We might be irritable, we might have anxiety, whatever. But basically, I look at that as you're not as willing to put up with everybody's shit as you used to be.
Totally.
And that's a
Yeah.
good thing because that's one of the reasons I think once you're in midlife, you kind of start thinking, I don't care what other people think about me. This is what I want for my life, and I'm not afraid to just say it. Or getting a lot of people get divorced in this stage of life. I've got divorced about 8 years ago because you start thinking, I can't live with this for the
I'm
rest of my
done.
life.
I'm
Yeah, and
over it. Yeah.
that really clicked for me because the reason we have all that estrogen earlier in life is because we have to be able to put up with this stuff. We have to deal
Totally.
with our kids and not getting sleep and, dealing with all those. We have to keep our kids alive, right? We have to put their needs ahead of ours in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
And then unfortunately, we continue doing that later in life once our kids, which I have one about to graduate high school and one who's in
Yeah.
college, they don't need you as much, but you a lot of women are still doing too much for their kids as
Yeah.
they get older or other people, and that's why I find a lot of women don't take care of their own health because
Yeah.
they're so busy helping
Yes.
everyone else. And so I think just you pointing out that, hey, this change is a good thing. Harness
Yeah.
it for your benefit. So, what I'm hearing is when we have not taken care of stress throughout
Hmm.
our lives, our adrenals get tired. And
Yeah.
then our body needs to rely on them for hormone production later in life.
Yeah.
And that's where some of that imbalance comes in. And then, secondly, our liver isn't able to do its job as well because it's
Yeah.
been bombarded with toxins, which
Yeah.
it's in our foods, it's the pesticides, it's in
Environment.
our
Yeah.
beauty products, it's in the air, it's in the water. But if we've been eating a lot of processed foods, not taking care, not exercising and getting the lymphatic drainage and helping the liver out. So it's
Yeah.
almost like those things sort of wear down. And then that's where, am I understanding that right? That's where these imbalances come in and why we don't feel good when we start going through perimenopause and menopause.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, over exercising as well. That's going to impact our oxidative stress. It's going to impact our liver, which directly impacts our hormones. And I think what I think is so important to understand about that stress hormone connection is when cortisol is elevated, and so many of us have been dealing, and we think we're okay. I talk to a lot of women and they're like, "No, I'm not really stressed." I'm like, let's talk about the last 5 years of your life. We're high functioning women have learned, and maybe part of it's that estrogen, to not think they're in stress when they're there. It doesn't mean your body's not experiencing it because our body keeps that score. But when cortisol is elevated, whether it's for an acute time as it's meant to be or a chronic time, it's catabolic. So it's breaking down our body for survival. That's the goal. And it is designed for that. It can reduce our pain receptors. It can reduce inflammation. There's some really important, valuable parts of it. But when it's there longer term, anytime cortisol is up, it has an anabolic counterpart, DHEA, which is designed to kind of come in after when cortisol comes down, heal the damage that cortisol has created. And it's the parent hormone to our main androgen sex hormones, so estrogen, testosterone. So if it's not able to come back up because cortisol is staying up there, then we aren't able to produce the hormones that we need at this time. And that's really critical because we've got stress, we've talked about environmental and the toxin stress, we've got regular stress in life, financial, relationship, career, but we have stress from over exercising or under exercising. We have stress from the foods that we are eating that might be bothering us that we don't even know. We have stress from pathogens we pick up in different places. So there's a lot of stress constantly on the body. And when that is elevated, we're not producing other hormones. So it also adds to the story.
So let's talk about symptoms. We've
Mhm.
mentioned a couple that you and I definitely have experienced. Maybe, for me, it was the night sweats and the
Yeah.
fatigue, especially,
Yeah.
and the anxiety.
Mhm.
What are some of the other, because something you said is, okay, this is happening for us, and it's to
Mhm.
bring our attention to there's an imbalance going on in your body. I like to call it a check engine light.
Yes,
If
that's
you are
perfect.
not well, it means you need to look under the hood and find where that imbalance is. So
Totally.
what are some of the things that women that could be kind of a here, red light flashing, this is what's
Yeah.
going on, and you need to look into this further.
Absolutely. So you named, I think, some of the most common, which are going to be night sweats, sleep issues, and insomnia, waking up not feeling refreshed, anxiety, depression, low mood, and weight gain. That's always like sort of this, weight gain, not recovering from your workouts if you are working out, restlessness, restless leg syndrome, digestive issues are a really big one. Not like swelling or inflammation or joint pain can be a really big one, not being able to recover from sickness because, and I mean, I could keep going. There's, I think they say there's like 48 known symptoms, but I think there's dozens more. I had this constant like twitch in my eye, like, those little tiny twitches, and it was constantly coming. That was a big one for me. Severe hot flashes, of course, that are not just like one off here and there, which again can be part of that transition. But if it's impacting your life, I always say if it's impacting your life more than 20%, that's your check engine light, like you were saying. And of course, if we don't deal with the check engine light, then it will eventually your car is going to die at the side of the road. And that is the truth about our body. Eventually, this metabolic chaos, we call it, will descend into further dysfunction, disease, chronic illness, and then eventually death. That is how the pathway goes. And it's not, we often think it's our hormones, but our hormones are connected to our immune system, our digestion, our detoxification, our energy production, and our nervous system. And they're all like this beautiful orchestra. And if one of them starts to go off, so if it is, if our liver's backing up a little, we'll call it the trumpet, and it's playing off tune, well, it's gonna impact the violins, which might be your hormones. And then it's gonna impact the piano, which is then our digestion, and so on. And in a month, we're playing a different tune and it's not a pretty one, right? And we can't just kind of come in and correct just the trumpet and expect it to all rectify. We actually have to come and kind of coach up the function of the entire functional system in our body and our metabolic system, we'll call it. And that's where I think it can feel challenging because it's not a specific thing that we can point to when we go to our healthcare practitioner. We really need to dig in and better understand where all the loss of function has come. So, all that to say, almost any symptom you're experiencing can be tied to your hormones.
And so let's say women listening are in that perimenopausal phase and they're
Yeah.
experiencing these symptoms. Or what if they're postmenopausal and they still don't feel good? There's
Mhm.
still the extra weight, there's still the fatigue, the not sleeping, and you're kind of thinking, well, I should be done with this now, right? I haven't had a period for over a year. I'm post menopause, but yet I'm still dragging. I'm still irritable. I still have no sex drive. What do we
Oh, that's a
do?
big
What
one.
can we do? Because
Yeah.
it's too late to fix the past, right? Maybe we
Yeah.
haven't eaten the way we should. Maybe we haven't been exercising. Maybe we've had, done all these things, which all of us have. So where do we then start to course correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I love this. Such a great question. And I always like to have very tangible things. So I always say we need to kind of like bring it back to, remember like teaching children to read. You don't just, put words in front of them and get them to figure it out. You teach them the letters of the alphabet and then the sounds of the letters and then the sounds that the letters make together to string them together. And we really need to do the same thing with our foundational health. So it doesn't really matter what practitioner you go to, their foundations of health are the same. And we need to first, I think, take a look at what I like to call our energy supply and demand ratio. Because if all this begins with the transition happening and kind of tipping the scales on the energy, we can come back to bringing some really great foundational health by just saying, okay, where's my energy supply and demand? What is taking my energy in the day? And there's things we can't avoid, right? Like our career, our relationship, maybe things like that we can't, or the fact that we're in perimenopause or menopause, we can't really avoid that workload, but we can take a look at, the demand that our workouts are putting on us, the demand that our relationships are putting on, like our friendships and everything. We can look at, the demand that stress is putting on us and how we're managing that. And we want to decrease our energy supply and increase our energy demand. And sorry, let me try that again. We
Other
want
way
to
around.
decrease our energy demand and increase our energy supply. And that looks like kind of our four foundational pillars of health, which are one, rest. We can't always control sleep, but am I going to bed at an appropriate hour, without screens in my face to disrupt, my cortisol and melatonin levels? Am I getting to bed and am I staying in bed in a restful state for at least 8 hours? Because that's kind of the minimum that we need at this age going through this transition. But am I going to bed at an appropriate time, waking up at an appropriate time? Am I eating 3 meals a day? We can get lots of fancy when it comes to nutrition, but we can't do fancy until we've done foundations. And so I'm always like, before we go diving into fancy things, we need to make sure our blood sugar is regulated. So we need to make sure we're waking up, we're eating within 2 hours of waking so that the body's not like, am I going to get food today? When am I going to get food today? Because then it just shifts into that unsafe storage place again. So we eat within 2 hours of waking. We eat 4 to 5 hours after that. We eat 4 to 5 hours after that. And then we have a snack if we have to go more than 4 to 5 hours, because that's life. But we eat enough in those meals to feel full and satisfied until the next meal. And that's how we know how to eat for our bodies, is when you listen to what your body is saying, not what some calculated number is that's telling you to do this or that. When you feel full and satisfied and well in between meals, it was a good meal for you, right? And of course, we want to take a look at our nutrition and make sure we're, keeping it 80%, I say, energy supplying foods. Like we all know that caffeine, alcohol, sugar, gluten, sometimes dairy can be real energy suckers and not energy providers. So we want to make sure that we're limiting those to a certain percentage. But that's a foundational piece of nutrition. We want to look at functional movement over intense fitness until our energy supply and demand has come together. So I always think like we need to walk and move our bodies and stretch our bodies every single day. So, but especially like aiming for that 7 to 10,000 steps a day and making sure that you are taking time to stretch and expand your body, whether it's yoga or stretching, whatever you want to call it, a few times a week. That's functional, foundational movement that the body requires for health. Abs, biceps, all great. We all know muscles super helpful for the body as we age, but it can't make that if we don't have the energy. So we need to make sure that the energy is there first. And then, of course, the last piece of the puzzle I always say is like stress and pleasure. They're tied together, because if you've ever tried to have fun or any type of pleasure and you're stressed, it doesn't fly. So we need to relieve our stress. We need to learn how to manage our relationship to stress. And then we need to go and make sure we're freaking having fun in our life, just for us sometimes. Whether that's singing, whether that's orgasming, whether that's, whatever it is for you, but something for you, just for you, that purely brings you pleasure goes such a long way in adding energy to our energy supply and demand ratio. So that's kind of the first, once we lock in these foundations, Sarah, and you probably talk about most of these things because we're,
Oh, yes.
once you lock in these foundations, you'll know, because you'll be sleeping better, have energy throughout the day, your digestion should be better. And the hack I find here is If you do these things for a month, 2 months, and you're not feeling better, that's when you know it's time to reach out to like a practitioner, a functional practitioner like myself, or someone like Sarah for help. And if you can't be consistent, that's also when you know it's time to reach out for help. So it makes it super clear, I think, do the foundational pieces. And then if you can't, you need help. And if you can and it's not changing it, you need help. And then you can actually get results fast when you work with a practitioner, because you're not going to have to start from ground zero of like, well, how am I sleeping and am I prioritizing this? Lock these foundations in, and you can actually get where you want to go so much faster, especially if you need some support.
I cannot agree more. These foundational things are something that so many of us have been neglecting for a really long time. And
Totally.
that's a big part of why we have those imbalances. And sometimes we want to look toward just a magic pill.
Yeah.
And like you said, doing hormone replacement is a tool, but that
Mm-hmm.
is not going to solve if you've been stressing yourself out your whole life and your adrenals are exhausted, if you are taking in too many toxins through junk
Yep.
food and things like that, and your liver, it's not, there's not one thing. You really, it's holistic. We have
Yeah.
to treat our bodies well if we want our bodies to thrive, and that's the goal. That's the goal.
Absolutely.
We want to
Yeah.
be able to thrive. So I know that you have an amazing tool for people who are listening, which is a daily hormone checklist so that people can start listening to their bodies, tuning in and saying, oh, well, do I have something out of balance? So I know that people can grab that at Bria, the period whisperer.com. And I'm going to put links in all the show notes so that anyone listening can get in touch with Bria and check out her podcast, The Period Whisperer, because I know people are going to be picking up what you are putting down. And I want to thank you so much for being here today. It's been just absolutely an amazing wealth of information.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I really appreciate what you do for women, how you show up, and just this opportunity to have this great conversation.
All right, everybody. Thank you so much for being here with us. And until next time, I will see you then.